The stomach contained 70 grams of dark fluid, but did not show pills or caps.
Okay, guys, we need in here. She was released from the ICU.
A nurse reveals Michael Jackson's last moments before his death at the hospital, and what comes out is raw, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. This is a brutal account of confusion, silence, and a body that told the truth long before the headlines did. What happened in those final moments changes how you see everything that came after.
He's not breathing yet. He's not breathing. I'm trying to concentrate. Where's he at?
By the time the 911 call finally came in, something already felt off. Not just medically off, emotionally off. This was a call about Michael Jackson, one of the most famous people on earth, yet the voice on the line was strangely controlled. No urgency you'd expect when a man is supposedly dying right in front of you. Emergency operators are trained to hear stress, to hear fear, and this call didn't sound like someone racing against death. That alone raised quiet red flags later on.
That means it was not functioning electrically, so I didn't feel that there could be a pulse. I then checked for a pulse myself. And
when paramedics pieced the timeline together, it became even more disturbing. Based on Jackson's condition, there was a strong possibility he had been unresponsive for a significant amount of time before anyone reached for the phone. Not minutes, potentially much longer. Paramedics would later say his body showed signs that didn't align with a sudden collapse. The kind of signs that suggest the emergency didn't begin when the call was placed. It began earlier, in silence, in delay, in a room where precious time slipped away without anyone calling for help.
I told my crew to continue ventilations, to stop CPR.
And continued ventilations means that the assistance of breath from Mr. Jackson would continue, but the compressions, the up and down motion on Mr. Jackson's chest would cease, correct?
By the time the ambulance doors opened at Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center, the hospital staff moved fast, but their instincts kicked in even faster. Nurses are trained to read bodies before monitors say a word, and what they saw didn't sit right. This didn't look like a man who had just gone down moments ago. His skin tone, his temperature, the lack of natural response in his body, it all pointed to something far more serious than a sudden emergency. One nurse noticed it almost immediately. This didn't feel like a fresh cardiac arrest. In emergency medicine, there's a difference, and experienced staff know it. A sudden collapse has a different look, a different urgency, a different chance. This felt like a prolonged arrest, the kind where the window to save someone may have already closed before the hospital ever got involved.
I believe that he was healthier than the average person of his age. He had an enlargement of the prostate gland, which meant that it was difficult to urinate, so he was retaining urine.
Okay.
He had vitiligo, which is a skin disorder, and he had a polyp of his colon. The nervous system showed mild diffuse swelling.
As they prepared the room, no one said it out loud, but the thought was there. You could feel it in the way people moved, in the way voices stayed calm but serious, in the way nurses exchanged quick looks without speaking. The body was telling a story, and it wasn't matching the one that was being told verbally. Then there was the doctor.
This was Michael Jackson, clearly in need of assistance, clearly under the influence of an intoxicant, and Conrad Murray, still knowing these things, continued to give him these drugs.
Conrad Murray arrived with him, but the information coming from him didn't line up with what the nurses were seeing. The explanation was vague. Dehydration. Exhaustion. Nothing that justified the state Michael Jackson was in. Experienced ER staff immediately felt the disconnect. When a patient comes in like this, every second matters, and every detail matters even more. Yet critical information wasn't coming out.
Standard, he's a big, strong man. He leaned over and started doing chest compressions immediately.
One hand or two-handed?
Two-handed.
When the EKG machine is connected and taking a reading, what information would be conveyed through that EKG machine?
The EKG machine shows the electrical activity of the heart.
Nurses noticed physical signs that suggested extended resuscitation attempts had already happened. IV marks, evidence of prior intervention, a body that looked worked on before it ever reached the hospital. These aren't things you miss when you do this for a living. And that's when the doubt settled in. Not loud doubt, quiet doubt. The kind professionals carry while still doing their job at full speed. As the code began, the room filled with controlled urgency, chest compressions, advanced life support. Protocol followed down to the second. But beneath all of it was a growing realization that this was no longer about saving a life, it was about confirming a loss. Nurses are trained to fight until the end, even when hope is thin, especially when the patient is someone the entire world knows. Still, signs kept stacking up. Pupils that didn't respond the way they should. A body that wasn't reacting the way a newly collapsed patient would. These are medical facts, not opinions, and they don't bend for fame.
I have done all I could do. I told the truth, and I have faith the truth will.
What made it more unsettling was the silence around certain medications. Only later would it come out that propofol, a powerful anesthetic never meant for home use, was involved. In that moment, though, nurses were working without the full picture. And in emergency medicine, missing information can be deadly. The longer it took for the truth to surface, the clearer it became that something had gone wrong long before the hospital doors opened. There's a point in every code where experienced nurses know. Not because they stopped trying, but because the body tells them. The heart rhythm doesn't change. The response never comes. The clock keeps moving, but the patient doesn't come back. That moment came quietly in that room. No dramatic announcement, just the heavy understanding that they were now performing procedures that were unlikely to change the outcome. When the official time of death was called later that afternoon, it felt more like paperwork catching up to reality. Many inside that room believed the real moment had already passed earlier, possibly even before the ambulance ever moved. The hospital didn't start the emergency, it inherited it. And that's the part that still unsettles people who were there, because hospitals are supposed to be the last line of defense. But sometimes all they can do is document what's already been lost. In Michael Jackson's case, the nurse's perspective doesn't rewrite history, it exposes the cracks in the story we were given. And those cracks are impossible to ignore once you know where to look. What really shifted the mood in that room wasn't the machines, it was Conrad Murray. Or more accurately, what he wasn't saying.
Michael Jackson self-administered a perfect storm in his body that killed him.
In an emergency room, doctors usually talk fast. They overshare. They throw information at nurses like confetti because every detail can save a life. But this time, it was oddly quiet. Nurses kept asking the same question in different ways. What did he take? What medications were given? And the answers kept sliding sideways. First, it was dehydration, then exhaustion, then vague references to sedation that didn't go anywhere. Meanwhile, the patient on the bed wasn't reacting like someone who skipped a few electrolytes. Here's the thing nurses know better than anyone. During a code, silence is dangerous. You can fix a mistake. You can't fix missing information. And the longer it took for propofol to even be mentioned, the more tension crept into the room. So when nurses later learned it had been used at home, the calm confusion turned into something heavier, because now the pieces were lining up, and they didn't look good. Then came the code blue.
There were a number of things that would ordinarily be used with propofol that were not available in this case.
If people expect chaos, shouting, and running in circles, that's not how it really looks. A code blue is organized chaos. Everyone knows their role. Movements are sharp. Voices are low but firm. And in this case, there wasn't panic. There was urgency, yes, but also restraint. Because the signs were already telling the staff that hope was thin. They did everything by the book. Chest compressions, airway management, medications, rhythm checks. Every step, every second accounted for. And still, Nothing changed, but they kept going, longer than usual, not because the situation looked promising, but because the person on that bed was Michael Jackson. You don't stop early when the world is watching, even if the body is telling you the outcome. There's a strange emotional weight to performing CPR on someone you've grown up seeing everywhere. Album covers, award shows, music videos. Now he's motionless, unresponsive, and not fighting back the way living patients do. Nurses don't usually think about fame during a code, but this one made it impossible not to. You could feel the pressure, not from cameras, they weren't there yet, but from history. And then there's a moment nurses don't talk about much. The moment they know. It doesn't come with an announcement. No dramatic pause. It's subtle. It's in the way the heart rhythm refuses to budge, in how the pupils don't respond, in how the body feels under your hands. Certain procedures start to feel symbolic. Necessary, yes, but no longer life-saving. Just steps you take because protocol demands it, not because you believe the outcome will change. When the official time of death is finally called, 2:26 p.m., it lands heavy, but not shocking. For some in the room, it feels like the clock is catching up to reality. There's a pause, a stillness. Some nurses are visibly stunned. Others aren't surprised at all. Everyone reacts differently, but everyone understands the same thing. Something about this timeline doesn't sit right, because by the time Michael Jackson reached the hospital, many believed the real moment had already passed. The hospital didn't witness the beginning of the emergency. It witnessed the end of it. Then comes the quiet reset. Machines are turned off. Documentation begins. Nurses do what they're trained to do. Move on to the next patient, the next crisis, the next room where someone might still be saved. That's the hardest part. History just died in front of you, and 5 minutes later, you're back to work.
The manner was homicide. For example, Dr. Murray's statement to the police indicated that the propofol and other medications were administered by another person.
So you're commenting that Dr. Murray admitted to administering the benzodiazepines and the propofol.
That's
What stays with them isn't just the loss, it's the disconnect. The feeling that the public story will never fully match what they saw with their own eyes. Nurses don't hold press conferences, they don't write headlines, they carry memories and move forward. And years later, when pieces come out in courtrooms and testimonies and delayed revelations, it doesn't feel surprising to them. It feels familiar. Because in that room, long before the world heard the word homicide, the body had already told its truth. There was tension, real tension. On one side, medical ethics. On the other, the media hurricane forming outside. When the patient is Michael Jackson, the hospital instantly becomes a pressure cooker. Every action is scrutinized. Every word matters. So staff do what they're trained to do best. Stick to facts, document everything, and let the system handle the rest. Even if they know the official story is already being shaped without them. And that's the uncomfortable truth. The official story doesn't form during the emergency. It forms after. Once the patient is gone, once statements are made, once lawyers step in, once narratives start getting cleaned up and simplified for public consumption. What nurses experienced in real time gets reduced to bullet points and press releases. Clean, neat, incomplete. Then came the legal fallout. As the case moved into courtrooms, something strange happened. Nurse observations started lining up with paramedic testimony. Different people, different roles, same conclusions. That Michael Jackson's condition suggested he had been down longer than anyone initially admitted. That the emergency didn't start at the hospital. That crucial information, especially about propofol, was delayed. And that delay changed everything. When the death was officially ruled a homicide, it didn't shock many hospital staff. It reframed the day. What they witnessed wasn't just a tragic collapse. It was the final chapter of a medical disaster that had already unfolded before the hospital doors opened. The courtroom said out loud what nurses had only been able to think privately. And yet, one question still hangs over everything. The question that never really goes away. Was Michael Jackson already dead before he reached the hospital? Some nurses believe the hospital became a stage. Not for deception, but for legitimacy. A place where the timeline could be anchored, where efforts could be documented, where death could be officially declared, even if it had already happened earlier. That's why the nurse's perspective matters. Not because it's sensational, but because it's grounded. Nurses don't deal in celebrity. They deal in bodies, responses, and time. And sometimes hospitals don't save lives. Sometimes they confirm losses. That truth doesn't make headlines, but it stays with the people who were there.
He said, no, my doctor said it's safe. It works quick and it's safe. As long as somebody's here to monitor me and wake me up, I'm going to be okay. He kept saying anesthesia.
What came next, however, was not closure. It was an escalation. Because once the question of when Michael Jackson died refused to settle, another darker thread began to pull at the edges of the story. Quietly at first, then with growing insistence. If the hospital was not the beginning of the emergency, then what exactly was its role? And why did so many details feel curated rather than chaotic?
He said, find me an anesthesiologist. I don't care how much money they want. Find me an anesthesiologist to be with me here overnight and give me this.
And that's where the nurse narrative comes in again. One of the nurses assigned during his final days reported that Michael Jackson wanted anesthesia, not sedation, not something mild. He wanted to be fully unconscious. He wanted certainty. He wanted the lights off completely, not dimmed. He asked with clarity, not confusion. That distinction matters. I refused. I refused because anesthesia is not comfort care. It is not sleep. It suppresses breathing. It destabilizes blood pressure. It requires continuous monitoring and immediate intervention if something goes wrong. Outside a surgical environment, it is a gamble with odds stacked against survival. I told him this directly. I did not soften it. He did not argue. That was the first warning sign. Patients who don't argue after being refused are not reassured. They are recalculating. When he accepted my answer, he did not look relieved. He looked resolved, as if he had reached a conclusion and was simply checking which paths were closed. He asked again later. The wording changed, but the intent did not. He wanted unconsciousness without interruption. He wanted time to disappear. He wanted relief that did not require waking up. I refused again. I documented the refusal. I documented the request. I documented my explanation of the risks. Documentation is how nurses protect patients and themselves. It is also how history gets written. He listened every time. He absorbed the information. He was not impaired in those moments. He was not confused. He was not reckless. That is what makes this dangerous to ignore.
Well, the person who called for him, I could hear Michael in the background. He called me and said, he was very frantic, and he said, Michael needs to see you right away. Can you come and see?
By the final days, the urgency was no longer emotional. It was logistical. He asked how long anesthesia could last. He asked what happens if breathing slows. He asked about oxygen levels. He asked questions people ask when they are planning, not pleading. I told him anesthesia can stop breathing entirely. I told him the brain begins to suffer irreversible damage within minutes without oxygen. I told him the body does not wake up on command once certain thresholds are crossed. He said, I understand. That sentence has stayed with me longer than any other. When I refused for the final time, I understood something that made my stomach drop. Refusal does not end a demand. It only removes one barrier. Someone determined will find another route, another provider, another solution that feels easier because it comes without resistance. Nurses learn this too late and too often.
There's memory loss. The last end result of this is death. I said, you don't want to do this. He said, no, my doctor said it's safe. It works quick and it's safe. As long as somebody's here to monitor me and wake me up.
When the emergency happened, there was no disbelief among some of us. There was urgency but not surprise. The atmosphere was heavy, controlled, and narrow. That is not how true rescue feels. Rescue is chaotic because hope is still alive. This was procedure because hope had already expired somewhere else. Ambulances are meant to bridge life and care. That day, it felt like the ambulance was transporting a conclusion. Not a patient to be saved, but an outcome to be formalized. By the time he arrived, his body was already communicating facts we could not reverse. Prolonged oxygen deprivation leaves unmistakable signs: skin tone, pupillary response, muscle rigidity. These are not subtle indicators. They do not lie. They do not improve with optimism. This is not sinister because it implies intent. It is sinister because it implies inevitability. Hospitals cannot announce uncertainty. They cannot say death likely occurred earlier. They must provide a place, a time, and a signature. The world demands a timestamp, and the hospital supplies it, whether or not biology agrees with the location. Once the death was declared, everything before that moment fell outside the hospital's jurisdiction. Private residence, private physician, and private decisions. That boundary matters more than people realize, because boundaries decide where questions stop.
But he said, no, he said one side is very, very hot, one side is cold. I said, I don't know what that could be. Maybe it's his heart, maybe it's his central nervous system. And at that point, I knew that somebody had given him something that hit that central nervous system, because, you know, that's all he wanted was to sleep, but he was in trouble.
Once the official story begins at the hospital, everything before becomes pre-hospital. That phrase is deceptively clean. It absorbs complexity. It seals responsibility behind walls that are difficult to penetrate. That is why the narrative stabilized so quickly. That is why conflicting details did not linger. Institutions move fast when ambiguity threatens liability, reputation, and legal exposure. Fame accelerates that instinct. Once death is declared in a hospital, that hospital becomes the final setting in public memory. That is where the story ends, regardless of where the irreversible moment actually occurred. The ending becomes smaller, cleaner, and easier to process. But some of us know the ending did not begin there. What haunts me is not what happened in the emergency room. It is what happened before it. The repeated request for anesthesia, the calm acceptance of refusal, the precision of the questions, the silence after being told no. Those details matter because they point to intent, not accident. When people ask whether he was already dead before reaching the hospital, they are circling the wrong center. The real turning point was earlier. It was the moment the need for unconsciousness outweighed the body's ability to survive it. That moment did not have monitors. It did not have witnesses trained to document it. It did not have a clock on the wall. And that is why it still unsettles people. Hospitals do not create mysteries. They contain them. They take chaos and reduce it to forms. They take loss and turn it into records. They make endings official. But sometimes in doing so, they become the final structure built around a truth that had already slipped beyond reach.